Welcome to the Global Math Department. My name is Amanda Risky, and I will be your host tonight. Tonight, we're going to hear from Professor Francis Su about building human themes into your teaching of math. Would everyone please introduce themselves in the chat window, telling us what you teach, where, and what your Twitter handle is if you have one.
Amanda, right now, I don't know if Francis has two webcam pictures of himself.
Oh, yeah, I see. Francis, yes. I don't know how to turn off one of your videos.
I don't know why there's two of them.
I don't know why there's two of them also. Let me see if I can.
There you go.
That's better.
That's good. Thanks for catching that. I thought it was just I was seeing double. Good. All right. Before I think everybody's introduced themselves, so thank you for doing that. Before I introduce our speaker, let me explain a little bit about how these meetings work. These meetings are recorded and are available a few hours after the meeting ends. To view the recording, come back to the same URL. The Global Math community prides itself on being friendly and supportive. The chat room is available for topical and general conversation throughout the meeting. I'll catch your questions for the presenter, so don't worry that he won't notice it in the chatter. I'll make sure that he gets to it at our question and answer section. So tonight is our speaker is Professor Francis Su. Francis Su is the Benedictson Carwa Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College and former president of the Mathematical Association of America. He has a passion for teaching and popularizing mathematics. From the Mathematical Association of America, he received the 2018 Holmes Ford Award for Writing and the 2013 Hymo Award for Distinguished Teaching. He authors the popular Math Fun Facts website and is creator of Math Feed, the math news app. His book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, published by Yale University Press, is an inclusive vision of what math is, who it's for, and why anyone should learn it. And with that, I will turn it over to Francis for his presentation.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot. First of all, thank you for having me. I just want to mention I am a little under the weather today, so if I have I might cough here and there just because I have just came down with something. But anyways, I am I'm really glad to be here and excited to have us think a little bit about what it means to build human themes into your teaching of math. I've been thinking about this for a little while. In terms of what does it look like to build human themes into our mathematics teaching? One of the questions that I have been wrestling with is this question of why we do math at all. this is probably an important question for any of us who are math teachers to really think through. Why should our students be learning mathematics, right? I mean, is it, for instance, just to make you college and career ready? I mean, that's one answer that people often give. Another view of mathematics is that you really don't need too many people to know advanced mathematics, and it's really only for the elite few. Unfortunately, this view is sort of common at the college level. Often you will encounter faculty members who think that you become a math major and only to turn out PhDs, right? So that's another view of what math is about. And then, of course, another question that people often ask is, when will I ever use this stuff that I'm learning? And one of the hard questions that all of us have to wrestle with is the idea that actually some of the math that you're teaching right now, you might not use in a future career. If you think a little bit about some of the exciting innovations of the last just even 10 years, there's mathematics that people are using today that didn't exist 20 years ago, right? So we have to ask that question: what is it? What is the purpose of learning math if I'm never going to use what I'm learning? So the reason I bring this up is that I guess I have been thinking a bit about what it means to do mathematics from a different angle, and that's the angle of human flourishing. So if you ask me why do mathematics, I would say that it's because mathematics actually helps people flourish. And this is maybe a different way of thinking about why we learn math. I mean, in some ways, it's not so important what the skills are as much as it is the kinds of habits of mind that we're building when we teach mathematics. And so, as I think Amanda mentioned, I've been thinking a bit about this question: what are some of the virtues that are built by the practice of doing mathematics? And the virtues that are built are the movement towards virtue happens through basic human desires. And so this book that Amanda mentioned that I just wrote is basically looking at mathematics from the angle of human flourishing. How does math meet our deepest human desires? So if you have a desire for exploration, how does math meet that desire? Another deep human desire is a desire for meaning, or a desire for play, or a desire for truth, or power, or justice, or freedom. These are all human themes, and I would claim that math actually helps us meet these desires if practiced properly. So what I'm going to do today is just have us think through a few of these themes and ways in which we can incorporate these themes into the teaching of mathematics. So before I talk about some of these particular themes, I think it's important for us to set the stage. So when we think about what it means to teach math, one of the questions that we have to ask is how are we going to communicate in our classrooms that we actually value the human side of mathematics? Because if you believe math is for human flourishing, then the classroom ought to be a place where the human side of mathematics is actually apparent and celebrated. So how can you communicate on day one that you value the human side of mathematics? There's a question that I'm going to just give us a moment to think about, and maybe even if you want to type your answer in the chat window. What do you do on day one to communicate to your students that you value the human side of math? Take a moment to maybe enter your answer in the chat window. Okay, I don't see anybody typing an answer here, but I'll offer a few of my own thoughts here. At the beginning of the semester, when I'm teaching a new class, I often like to set the stage in certain ways to help my students see that that math is that this classroom is going to be maybe a little different than what they expect. So one way that you, for instance, can set the stage at the beginning of your school year is to have students share their methodographies. So the idea of a methodography is basically it's like a biography of your experiences in mathematics. What are your personal histories in doing mathematics? What do you like? What do you dislike? What are some memorable experiences? And these kinds of methodographies are actually really wonderful ways of getting to know your students. They also get to know a little bit about you. One of the things that I think often surprises my students when I share my own experience in mathematics is they're a little surprised to find out that I haven't always had an easy path in mathematics, because they're used to thinking of their professor or their teacher as somebody who's never really wrestled or struggled in math. And this can be a wonderful way to open up for your students the idea that you don't have to be a perfect, you don't have to have had perfect experience in mathematics to continue to do mathematics. Another thing that I like to do at the beginning of class is to share the kinds of virtues that I expect my students will build. So that I'm setting the stage in terms of helping them see that math is, that at the end of this class, I'm going to help them develop superpowers. That's one way I like to put it. I'm going to help them develop courage in being able to attack problems that may seem daunting. I'm going to help them develop curiosity. I'm going to help them develop persistence. I'm going to develop in them an expectation of enchantment. Another thing I like to say to my students is math is equipment for thinking. And who doesn't want to be a better thinker, right? So that's one way that I like to help my students develop a vision for what they're going to get out of the math that they're doing. Here's another thing that I often like to do. Excuse me. I like to share my philosophy of what it means to teach math. For instance, if I want to get across the idea that math is exploratory, I like to tell my students math isn't calculation, math is exploration. Or if I want to get across the idea that I don't want them to stress out about the grades that they're making, I will tell them that grades measure progress, but they don't measure promise. In college, of course, students are often really worried about their grades, and it can be disarming when I tell my students that their worth as individuals don't depend on the grade they make in my class. It's a little bit that may seem a little surprising that students might think that, but often students derive a lot of their own self-worth from how they perform, and I'd like to dispel that idea at the beginning of class. Another thing I often say is that I believe everybody can succeed in this class. And I often start off the class with some inspirational quotes that talk about the value of struggle. And that's another idea I want to get across in my math courses. Even at the college level, this idea that math is actually more about learning how to struggle than it is about getting answers. And so I like this particular quote. Every time that a human being succeeds in making an effort at attention with the sole idea of increasing his grasp of truth, he acquires a greater aptitude for grasping it, even if his effort produces no visible fruit. This is an example of this idea that actually, when you are working on a math problem, even if you don't solve the problem, you are actually exercising your math muscles, and it's going to be good for you to solve that next problem, even if you can't solve the current one. Okay, so let's talk about some of these human themes, these basic human desires that all of us have, and how they might show themselves in the teaching of mathematics. So one basic human desire that is a desire shared by all of us is the desire for exploration. So if you think a little bit about what it means to explore, take a moment to think about something that you like to explore. Maybe you are exploring a cave, or maybe you like to go hiking and you like exploring a new trail. What are some of the things that make exploration exciting? Think a little bit about that. When I was a kid, I loved the stars, and I used to love looking up at the night sky. I dreamed about space, and I liked exploring the new worlds that were available to me in these books about astronomy. And if you think a little bit about what exploration is, it's this idea that you're captivated by mystery, right? You're motivated by questions, right? What lies around the next corner? What's going on with those rings around that planet? Why are there patterns? Right? There's this idea that you're pushing forward. You're not discouraged. You're fazed by setback. Right? This is part of what makes exploration exciting. You don't know what you're going to find when you set out on this journey. And so the idea here is that exploration, this deep human desire that we all have, it's actually at the heart of what it means to do math, right? You don't need a lot of resources except your mind to be a math explorer. And so you can embark on an adventure from anywhere. And this it cultivates in us certain virtues, like the virtue of imagination and creativity, right? In order to solve problems, you have to dream up new ideas, right? If you just take a look at the the phone in your pocket that now seems to do all these wonderful, marvelous things. Basically, there's a lot of math behind many of these technological marvels, and it's because people had this idea that had built imagination and creativity through the desire to explore. And one of the biggest virtues that I think exploration cultivates in us is this expectation of enchantment. Right? Explorers are excited by the thrill of finding the unexpected, and this is why exploration is exciting, because you never know what you're going to see around the next corner. And so, if you think a little bit about this, what would that look like in mathematics? That's the question. What would it look like in mathematics? So, for instance, if you take this fractal sponge with lots of self-similar squares all over, and you slice it diagonally, and you suddenly find a bunch of hexagonal stars, that's surprising, right? That's enchanting. It causes you to reflect and ask, why? Why do I see those stars? So how do we build in this kind of exploration into our teaching? That's a question I want all of us to consider. How do you make your classroom a place of exploration? How can you train your students to expect enchantment around every corner? So I'll give you a moment to think about this, and maybe even, I guess, suggest, if you have ideas, feel free to pop them in the window, in the chat window. And I'll offer my own ideas in a minute here. So here are some of my own thoughts about how I try to make exploration part of what I do in the classroom. One thing is in setting the stage. So I like to tell my students in this class, good questions are better than good answers. I love questions that set us on a different path, or cause us to ask questions that we haven't asked before. So I'll tell my students that this is an important part of what I would like them to learn to be able to do. One of the classes I teach is this advanced course. It's called topology, which you can think of as the study of abstract study of shape. And this is an exploratory class, and it's a class where asking a good question can set us on a path of interesting exploration. Another thing that I tell my students is I'm going to train you to think and to reason and to solve problems you've never seen before. So this is part of what I do in terms of setting the stage. Here's another way to turn make a class more exploratory. If you have a problem that asks students to compute something, that's always going to be a dull question. But more exploratory problems would be open-ended. So if I can turn a question into what happens if, then that's a exploratory question. Or if I ask my students to create something, that's another way to turn a dull question into an exploratory question. Having your students to debate whether it's better to do to solve this question, a particular problem using one method or another. That's another way to encourage exploration in your students. I like this example that if you haven't seen this book, it's a really great book by Ben Orlin, Math with Bad Drawings. He talks about how if you have a question like this one, find the area and perimeter of a rectangle with height 3 and width 11. That's kind of a dull question, right? Why is it dull? Well, one reason it's dull is you're just asking kids to compute something, right? And in fact, if you want to compute the area and you multiply 3 times 11, that's just a computation. And you're not even having your students grapple with what area actually means or what the perimeter actually is. And so what he suggested is a much more interesting question. This is a much more exploratory question. Create 2 rectangles so that the first has a bigger perimeter and the second a bigger area. Right? That's a much more interesting question, right? Because you actually have to grapple with what area and perimeter are. And there's lots of potential answers that students can come up with. Create 2 rectangles so that the first has a bigger perimeter and the second a bigger area. This is way more interesting. And in appealing to your students' desire to explore, the math that they're doing actually becomes more interesting to them. Here's another example. In an algebra class, you might be asked, or you might ask your students to simplify an expression like x plus y times x minus y. That's kind of a dull question, right? A more interesting question would ask them to grapple with the meaning of this algebraic expression, right? So an exploratory version would be 2 numbers sum to 10. How can you make their product as large as possible, right? Is it better to do 2 times 8 or 3 times 7? Like, which one is going to be bigger? Asking your students to wrestle with that question is way more interesting and way more exploratory. Or, for instance, asking them to see if they notice any patterns, right? How much does the product go up by if you raise one number and lower the other? And pretty soon after you do lots of examples, you might discover for yourself this algebraic identity: x plus y times x minus y equals x squared minus y squared. Much more exploratory. Another way to turn your problems, your classroom problems into exploratory problems is to use problems that have open middles. This is a nice book by Robert Kaplinski that basically has lots of examples of problems that have many paths to a solution. And this is great because it gives students different ways that they can answer the question. Way more exploratory and way more interesting. In terms of cultivating an expectation of enchantment, it's really great if you can give students problems with beautiful, interesting, or unexpected solutions. Right? This is part of the expectation of enchantment that is cultivated when you explore. How do we make that possible in a math class? A good place to find such problems is puzzle books or problem books. They often have this feature. I highly recommend just getting a problem book and looking in the problem book for interesting questions that you can give your students to play with. Here's another basic human desire to play. So think about all the various kinds of play that you engage in. right? If you think about beach play, word play, there's lots of kinds of play that it could be playing a sport. It could be board games. What makes play play? Well, of course, play should be fun, but what else? What other qualities does play have? Often play has some kind of structure, right? Like the rules of a game. But there's often freedom within that structure, and that freedom leads to investigation. And one of the things that characterizes play is that there isn't a great stake. There's no great stake in the outcome. And there's often some surprise that happens when you explore the freedom of play, right? So in playing a game, it might be a thrilling end to a football game, or a satisfying pun in wordplay. And another aspect of play is that it involves the mind and the imagination. In fact, I like to say that mathematics makes the mind its playground. And so what would it look like then to incorporate play in your math teaching, if play is a basic human desire? And I'm not just talking about turning things into games, right? I'm talking about looking at all these kinds of qualities of play and trying to incorporate them into your teaching, right? So how can you cultivate a spirit of play in doing math? And how do you make math a playful sport rather than a performance sport? Take a moment to think about that. And of course, feel free to share your ideas if you want to. And I'll share my own thoughts. Here's a book that really, I think, captures a lot of what it looks like to engage in playful learning. It's called Math Recess. You might check this out. It has lots of ideas for teachers. In terms of building play into your classroom, one of the questions to think about is, how do you make room for questions or investigation or surprise or imagination? Right? These are all aspects of play. Right? So one of the things I like to do in my college class is to give students an opportunity to come up with their own questions, and questions that they are wondering about. How do I make room for surprise or imagination? How do I turn this space into one where there's no great stake in the outcome? And one of the problems, of course, with grades is that because students value them so much, it can actually take away from the playful parts of learning. So I like to de-emphasize the role of grades in my class as a measure of progress, not a measure of promise. And I like to change my assessments to value process, not just outcome. How do we make math a playful sport? Excuse me. One of the things I like to do in my classes is to encourage reflection. So for instance, my students know that on the final exam, they're likely to get a question like this one. What have you learned in this class about the process of creating mathematics? You might think of some of the your own reflection questions that emphasize the playful side of mathematics. Here's another basic human desire, desire for beauty. Think about something beautiful that you enjoy looking at, that you enjoy experiencing. How can you appeal to the desire for beauty in your math class? I like to think of beauty, mathematical beauty, in four ways. There's sensory beauty. This is like the beauty of physical objects, the beauty of patterns, right? If you have some beautiful pattern that is that you're witnessing, that's sensory beauty. And then there's another kind of beauty, wondrous beauty. This is the beauty of ideas. So if you see an interesting mathematical idea, this is maybe a slightly deeper kind of beauty. Insightful beauty is the beauty of reasoning. So this is when you maybe you would encounter this in I guess you could encounter this in many different settings, but often you see insightful beauty when students start understanding the process of reasoning. If you see a beautiful proof, for instance, that might be insightful beauty. And then overarching them all is the idea of transcendent beauty. This is like the beauty of seeing the big picture. It's like seeing the same idea show up over and over again in multiple places. So one way that I like to build themes of beauty into my courses is to have students reflect on mathematical beauty. And you might give them a choice for what kind of beauty they want to reflect on, or what sources they might choose to use. You could, for instance, have them look at some artwork or expressions of in music or culture. You might have them reflect on each of these kinds of beauty and where they've seen beauty. And you might be surprised, actually, by reading their essays. One of the things that I have done in my class to encourage a delight in beauty is to start off each class with a 5-minute math fun fact, as I like to call it. And so these are basically 5-minute cool math ideas presented. I basically take the first 5 minutes of class to show my students that there's some interesting math that's not just something that they need to learn for an exam. And I've archived a lot of these on this site called Math Fun Facts. And if you Google Math Fun Facts, you should be able to find it. There's some books that you might enjoy. This book by Roger Nelson is called Proofs Without Words. And it's actually really, it has lots of delightful pictures, like the picture on this cover. You might be able to see this one here. It has a pattern of black and red dots. And I think what you're seeing here, if you start from the bottom left corner, is you see a red dot. And then around it, you see 3 black dots. And then around that, you see 5 red dots. And then the next L-shaped set of dots is black, and there are 7 dots. And what you're seeing here is basically you're summing up the odd numbers and realizing that they form a square. And so this is a proof without words that shows that when you sum up the odd numbers, you'll always get a square. It's kind of delightful. And this book has lots of other morsels like that. It's really a wonderful book. you might your students might enjoy flipping through this book as well. Here's another basic human desire, the desire for justice. And if you think a little bit about what that is or what that means, and how does that intersect with the teaching of mathematics, one of the ways that I've been reflecting about this has been in thinking about whether I'm treating my students justly. It's very easy to just pay attention to some of the students who seem to be on top of things, and to not pay attention to other students who seem like they don't care. But if I want to teach justly, I think I need to reflect on how I can reach all my students. So what would that look like? Here's a book that I highly recommend that just came out. You can actually get a free PDF online. It's called Living Proof, and it's stories of resilience along the mathematical journey, and basically contains little vignettes, stories of mathematicians and ways that they've needed to persist in spite of some of their struggles. And so this is one way to sort of educate ourselves in terms of the kinds of challenges that people face in doing mathematics. So I highly recommend this book. Another thing that is useful is to learn about inclusive teaching. And there's a lot of good resources out there related to inclusive teaching. Thinking a bit about in your classroom who speaks and who doesn't get to speak. And also thinking a bit about what does it mean how can we affirm what students actually bring to the classroom, rather than just picking on students for the deficits they might have. These are all ways to think about teaching justly. If you want to start some conversations with either your colleagues or with students, I have a bunch of articles I've written about some of these topics, and they're all posted on my webpage. If you look on my webpage, you'll find some articles I wrote when I was president of the Mathematical Association of America, encouraging people to think about some of these issues. The culture of the classroom, the kinds of things we say that might unintentionally discourage people. I offer this as useful resources. One question to think about is how we, as teachers, make space for reflection about our teaching practices. What are some of the things that you do? What are some of the ways that you can include or make time for reflection about teaching justly? Here's another way to build in this idea of justice. This is coming from a different angle, and that's the angle of how you can use math to actually model some of the problems that are going on in the world. And something that's been in the news a lot recently is the coronavirus. There's lots of interesting math modeling that can provide natural bridging points to discuss with your students about how math is used in the real world. There's lots of other questions that are probably good for students to think about, right? What are some of the local problems in your local communities that math can be used to model? Certainly, if you're teaching, let's many of the high school topics lend themselves pretty well to this kind of modeling. Here's another basic human desire, the desire for freedom. So what are some of the freedoms that we have in doing mathematics? And how do we allow our students to experience freedom in our classes? So if you think a little bit about what freedoms we have in mathematics, one is the freedom of knowledge, right? This is the idea that when you know about things, if you, for instance, know many different ways to solve a problem, then that actually gives you a certain freedom to be able to choose the best way to solve your problem, right? This is a way that by doing mathematics, students begin to build this idea of freedom. When you know the freedom of knowledge is something that we often take for granted. There's the freedom to explore. We've already talked a bit about exploration. There's the freedom to imagine, right? This is dreaming up new interesting patterns or structures. How do you give students freedom in the class? There's the freedom of knowing all your options. And there's the freedom of welcome. And what I mean by that is the idea that in doing mathematics, we need to encourage our students to be welcoming to other people in doing mathematics as well. And so I offer just some thoughts about what it looks like to the difference between freedom in the class and domination, right? If you are doing exercises without learning to make sense of what you're doing, that can feel like domination, right? Or being told there's only one right way to do things. If students are noticing that other students are getting treated differently, or feeling like you constantly have to prove yourself, this feels like domination. On the other hand, if you're allowed to play with ideas and brainstorm, that's freedom, right? If you're given choices on how to solve a problem, if you really begin to understand, that's freedom. Having a teacher that believes in your potential. So how do you create spaces in your class so that students can feel like your class is a free class where they're able to experience freedom? That's part of the question I want us all to think about. All right, I'm just going to do a couple more here. This is community, basic human desire. All of us have a desire for community. And one of the things that I think is hard about mathematical communities is that it's often too focused on achievement. And often it's a narrow, one-dimensional kind of achievement, right? So, for instance, I'll show you what it looks like, so like at some of the lower level, lower grades, students come away with the idea that you need to be quick in order to do mathematics well, right? That somehow we use speed as a measure of mathematical ability, when in reality, it's not being fast that's important, right? It's actually important to be slow, to take time to reflect and think on ideas deeply, right? But somehow people end up with this idea that in order to be good at math, you have to be fast at math. At the college level, it often looks like what classes, how advanced placed are you, right? Students often think, oh no, if I didn't place into a high enough class, I'm not cut out to be a math major. And so how do we begin to press back against this idea that there's only one way to show growth in mathematics? Well, I would say by emphasizing the virtues that are built by mathematics, right? So for instance, there's lots of ways to evidence growth. One way to evidence growth in mathematics is by developing persistence and pushing through a hard problem and really wrestling with a problem, right? This is an important mathematical skill. And so one of the questions for us as teachers is to think, how can we begin to value and assess some of these virtues? How can you begin to measure mathematical persistence or mathematical creativity or an expectation of enchantment, right? We have to show our students that we value a lot more than just the one-dimensional view of math. Another thing to think through in terms of community is how we design group work, right? There's this idea when you design group work that you want to develop group-worthy tasks. So design projects where everybody's contribution is necessary for the team to succeed. You don't want it to be the case that one student can dominate. A book that I think has some really good ideas here for designing group work is this book by Alana Horn called Motivated. Excuse me. This is maybe the last basic human desire. It's a desire we all have for love, right? And so what does it look like to make your class a class where students experience love? And one of the big ways that happens is just by our own posture as math teachers in believing in our students, right? To love another human being is to see everybody as worthy of the beauty and joy that come from understanding, right? All of us are worthy of this. And so how do we make spaces in our classroom for our students to really see that we believe in them? Okay, well, I think I'll end there, and maybe I'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Francis, for sharing with us. And
in the chat window, you have questions.
Yeah, if people could post their questions in the Q&A. I think there's one there by Barbara Baker.
Oh, I see some. I see some questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. I can scroll down. That was the reason I couldn't see the things earlier. Excuse me. As I mentioned earlier, I have a cold, so I am battling a cold right now.
There's one, and also could you...
Yeah, there was a question about a list of all the books. Yeah, we can make that available. Certainly, no problem. Somebody asked a question about slow computational speed lead to a lack of time to grasp incoming input? Yeah, I mean, certainly it's important. Fluency is an important skill, and we definitely do want our students not to be spending too much time thinking about basic concepts. So that's definitely something I am all in favor of in building fluency. I guess my thought here is that it's not beyond basic fluency, the idea that speed is somehow the only measure of mathematical ability, or the primary measure of mathematical talent, I think can be harmful or detrimental. There are many people I know who are mathematicians now who were never fast as kids, right? And they didn't think that they would study math until they started seeing later on some of its beauty and wonder. Looking through some of the other questions here. Yeah, definitely open-ended tasks and questions are great and encouraging exploration. I like this idea of starting class with an experiment or interesting problem where they can make conjectures. That is such an important skill, being able to make conjectures. Often I am, as a college professor, my students go off and get jobs in industry, and one of the main reasons that when I talk to employers and they say they're interested in hiring math majors, and I ask them why, they say, well, it's because math majors are good problem solvers, right? So it's not the specific skills that matter as much as the general habits of mind, and that's part of what I guess I'm hoping that we, as math teachers, might be able to offer a better answer to the question, why do math, right? It's building in us virtues that enable us to flourish in no matter what profession you go into or wherever your life takes you, right? We can give better answers to this question, why do math, than to get a good job or get a good career, right? There really is something marvelous and amazing about being able to learn to think and to reason, right? That's going to serve you well in any profession.
I think we have time for one more question, and there is one on there that we haven't addressed yet, and it's from Farquin.
Let's see if there's any final questions here. Oh, I like this one. Somebody mentioned, don't cover the curriculum, help your students uncover it. I like that. Oh, yes. Okay, question here. How do you suggest a balance between covering curriculum and the idea of playing, exploring, and discovering? I work in a system with a standardized testing, and it affects my job. Yeah, that's a great question. I face maybe something similar at the college level. Often there's a class, if I'm teaching some class and there's a class that students are supposed to take after my class, I feel this race, this pressure to cover all the material so that students will be ready for the next class. And one of the things that I realized after teaching in this way for a while is, my students actually are not learning that much. I mean, when I basically try to rush through the material and in order to cover all the topics, well, in the end, that's actually somehow detrimental to them because they're not actually even learning. And I've realized now it's much better for me to tell a coherent story and equip my students with the idea of exploration and play. And if I am able to give my students the excitement of learning, then they're going to be able to read any math textbook and catch up for that in the next class. So I guess my opinion is that it's a lot better for my a lot more beneficial for my students to actually learn something, and that might mean covering fewer topics. Now, of course, you might have unfortunately pressures from the school district or from others in terms of what as you mentioned, standardized testing. That's a real challenge, and I don't have good answers for that. It might be helpful if you can to try to group all the topics that you need to cover and try to tell a coherent story with them. And that might make it easier for students to make sense of what they're learning. This gets to the idea of another deep human desire, which is the desire for meaning. Right? Things make much more sense when there's a story. Right? So what's the story that we can tell our students about the meaning of things that they're learning in math?
Well, on that, thank you so much, Francis, for sharing with us.
Yeah, I see the comment about being harassed by admin. Yeah, it's a hard challenge. I don't know that I have good answers other than telling myself that I'm doing better by my students if they're actually taking the time to learn and explore.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you so much, Francis, for sharing with us. We really appreciate it. Next week, we are taking a break.
So let's see. Are there other questions? Actually, I don't even know how long these webinars go.
We are
I'm happy to stick around. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm a bit under the weather here, so my voice is cracking and I'm coughing a little bit. But I do hope I hope all of you continue to do the good work you're doing, thinking about mathematics as not just taking a utilitarian view of math, but thinking about how math can be used to help our students and ourselves flourish. Hello, Australia. You know, my wife is Australian. And so I'm especially pleased that we have people on here from Australia. That's great.
I'm just going to sign off. Thank you very much, Francis.
I can't hear you, Amanda.
Oh.
Are you talking? Somehow.
Amanda is talking.
Yeah.
Oh, I hear you now. Somehow I had my thing turned off.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, glad to hear. Sorry, I didn't want you to think that we were not thanking you, and we're going to close out the session now. But thank you, everyone, for joining us on the webinar. Next week, we are taking a break, so please rewatch one of your favorite Global Math Department webinars or watch a new one. We will be back on February 25th with Sarah Bush presenting Rightfully Positioning Mathematics and Integrated STEAM Instruction. Thank you again very much, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.